manual labor or manual work is physical work done by people, most especially in contrast to that done by machines, and to that done by working animals. It is most literally work done with the hands, and, by figurative extension, it is work done with any of the muscles and bones of the body. For most of human prehistory and history, manual labor and its close cousin, animal labor, have been the primary ways that physical work has been accomplished. Mechanization and automation, which reduce the need for human and animal labor and production, have existed for centuries, but it was only starting in the 19th century that they began to significantly expand and to change human culture. To be implemented, they require that sufficient technology exist and that its capital costs be justified by the amount of future wages that they will obviate. Although nearly any work can potentially have skill and intelligence applied to it, many jobs that mostly comprise manual labor are such as fruit and vegetable picking, manual materials handling, manual digging, or manual assembly of parts often may be done successfully by unskilled or semi-skilled workers. Thus there is a partial but significant correlation between manual labor and unskilled or semi-skilled workers. Based on economic and social conflict of interest, people may often distort that partial correlation into an exaggeration that equates manual labor with lack of skill. With lack of any potential to apply skill or to develop skill. And with low social class. Throughout human existence the latter has involved a spectrum of variance, from slavery, to caste or caste-like systems, to subtler forms of inequality. Economic competition often results in businesses trying to buy labor at the lowest possible cost or to obviate it entirely. Relationship to low skill and low social class. For various reasons, there is a strong correlation between manual labor and unskilled or semi-skilled workers, despite the fact that nearly any work can potentially have skill and intelligence applied to it. It has always been the case for humans that many workers begin their working lives lacking any special level of skill or experience. It has also always been the case that there was a large amount of manual labor to be done. And that much of it was simple enough to be successfully done by unskilled or semi-skilled workers, which has meant that there have always been plenty of people with the potential to do it. These conditions have assured the correlation's strength and persistence. Throughout human prehistory and history, wherever social class systems have developed, the social status of manual laborers has, more often than not, been low, as most physical tasks were done by peasants, serfs, slaves, indentured servants, wage slaves, or domestic servants. For example, legal scholar Ali Khan analyses how the Greeks, Hindus, English, and Americans all created sophisticated social structures to outsource manual labor to distinct classes, castes, ethnicities, or races. The phrase hard labor has even become a legal euphemism for penal labor, which is a custodial sentence during which the convict is not only confined but also put to manual work. Such work may be productive, as on a prison farm or in a prison kitchen, laundry, or library. Intrinsically senseless, with the only purpose being the effect of the punishment on the convict. Or somewhere in between. There has always been a tendency among people of the higher gradations of social class to oversimplify the partial correlation between manual labor and lack of skill into one of equivalence, leading to dubious exaggerations such as the notion that anyone who worked physically could be identified by that very fact as being unintelligent or unskilled, or that any task requiring physical work must be simplistic and not worthy of analysis. Given the human cognitive tendency toward rationalization, it is natural enough that such gray areas have often been warped into absolutes by people seeking to justify and perpetuate their social advantage. Throughout human existence, but most especially since the Age of Enlightenment, there have been logically complementary efforts by intelligent workers to counteract these flawed oversimplifications. For example, the American and French revolutions rejected notions of inherited social status, and the labor movements of the 19th and 20th centuries led to the formation of trade unions who enjoyed substantial collective bargaining power for a time. Such counteractive efforts have been all the more difficult because not all social status differences and wealth differences are unfair. Meritocracy is a part of real life, just as rationalization and unfairness are. Social systems of every ideological persuasion, from Marxism to syndicalism to the American dream, have attempted to achieve a successfully functioning classless society in which honest, productive manual laborers can have every bit of social status and power that honest, productive managers can have. Humans have not yet succeeded in instantiating any such utopia, but some social systems have been designed that go far enough toward the goal that hope yet remains for further improvement. At its highest extreme, the rationalized distortion by economic elites produces cultures of slavery and complete racial subordination, such as slavery in ancient Greece and Rome, slavery in the United States, or slavery under Nazism. Concepts such as the Three-Fifths Compromise and the Untermensch define slaves as less than human. In the middle of the spectrum, such distortion may produce systems of fairly rigid class stratification, usually rationalized with fairly strong cultural norms of biologically inherited social inequality, such as feudalism, traditional forms of aristocracy and monarchy, colonialism, and caste systems. One interesting historical trend that is true of all of the systems above is that they began crumbling in the 20th century and have continued crumbling since. Today's forms of them are mostly greatly weakened compared to past generations' versions. At the lowest extreme, such distortion produces subtler forms of racism and de facto inequality of opportunity. The more plausible the deniability, the easier the rationalization and perpetuation. For example, as inequality of opportunity and racism grow smaller and subtler, their appearance may converge toward that of meritocracy, to the point that valid instances of each can be found extensively intermingled. At such areas of the spectrum, it becomes ever harder to justify efforts that use de jure methods to fight de facto imbalances, because valid instances can be highlighted by all sides. On one side, the cry is ongoing oppression from above. On the other side, the cry is reverse discrimination. Ample valid evidence exists for both cases, and the problem of its anecdotal nature leaves no clear policy advantage to either side. Equals recognizing the potential for skill equals, a willingness to recognize that manual labor can involve skill and intelligence can take a variety of forms, depending on how it handles multifaceted questions of dignity and equality. In its healthier forms, it recognizes the dignity and intelligence of blue-collar workers, and it recognizes their civil equality with white-collar workers. Yet it simultaneously leaves room in society for meritocracy, allowing both upward and downward social mobility. An example of such systems is provided by well-run instances of professional sports teams, because there is a perennial meritocratic turnover of players, coaches, and staff, both within the sport and as input and output through its boundaries, whereby all participants have dignity even though all of the required talents may not exist in each individual. In its more pathological forms, it may only admit that there can be a science of manual labor, but not acknowledge or allow adequate social mobility between the blue-collar and white-collar classes. On the other hand, and equally pathologically, it may willfully deny the natural differences between individuals, allowing no hope for meritocratic justice, which is not only dispiriting to talented and hard-working people, but also highly injurious to macroeconomic performance. An example of the first pathology is that the earliest forms of applying science to the practical processes of industry and commerce fell victim to an incomplete understanding, as exemplified by Frederick Winslow Taylor's version of the science of shoveling. Taylor correctly recognized that the physical talents for shoveling and the mental talents for analyzing and synthesizing best shoveling techniques and workflows often would not coexist in the same person. Some people would have only the first. Others, only the second. Therefore players usually should not be their own coaches. Unfortunately, Taylor stepped from that valid realization to envisioning a system of business administration that might easily have failed to filter people into the right roles based on their individual talents. Taylor's versions of scientific management, had they succeeded in persisting, may well have eventually left some smart people stranded in an underclass at the same time that it let some incompetent but silver-spooned people remain in positions of middle or senior management. Whether Taylor was capable of predicting and preventing that problem is unclear, but it is clear that not all of his imitators and admirers were thus capable. An example of the second pathology are 20th-century variants of communism, such as Leninism and Stalinism. Somewhere between the extremes of health and pathology mentioned above are the realities in most developed economies today, where various themes and tendencies are in constant competition, and people disagree on which ones predominate and what actions should be taken to try to even the balance or reduce the pathologies. Relationship to mechanization and automation. Mechanization and automation strive to reduce the amount of manual labor required for production. The motives for this reduction of effort may be to remove drudgery from people's lives, to lower the unit cost of production, or, as mechanization evolves into automation, to bring greater flexibility to production. Mechanization occurred first in tasks that required either little dexterity or at least a narrow repertoire of dexterous movements, such as providing motive force or tractive force, digging, loading, and unloading bulk materials, or weaving uncomplicated cloth. For example, Henry Ford described his efforts to mechanize agricultural tasks such as tillage as relieving drudgery by transferring physical burdens from human and animal bodies to iron and steel machinery. Automation helps to bring mechanization to more complicated tasks that require finer dexterity, decision-making based on visual input, and a wider variety of intelligent movements. Thus even tasks that once could not be successfully mechanized, such as shelf stocking or many kinds of fruit and vegetable picking, tend to undergo process redesign leading to ever smaller amounts of manual labor. Relationship to offshoring, worker migration, penal labor, and military service. Many of the methods by which socio-economically advantaged people have maintained a supply of cheap labor over the centuries are now either defunct or greatly curtailed. As discussed and linked earlier, these include peasantry, serfdom, slavery, indentured servitude, wage slavery, or domestic servitude. But motives to get labor cheaply still remain. Today, although businesses can no longer get away with using de jure slavery, economic competition ensures that they will always try to buy labor at the lowest possible cost or to obviate it entirely. Various present-day methods of ensuring lowest cost exist, as detailed below. The first and most basic method is the domestic labor market within one country, in which workers compete with each other for jobs. Within this market, further market segmentation is possible. Businesses try to avoid overtime. They often try to avoid employing full-time employees in favor of part-time employees or contingent workers, or day laborers, all of which usually entail less obligation for employee benefits. Agencies tasked with enforcing labor law are supposed to be perennially on guard against the avidity with which employers find clever ways to make people function like FTEs but carry nominal labels as contractors, freelancers, or PTEs. Other avenues of discount labor are the institutions of apprenticeship and cooperative education, and the informal tradition of the broke college student who works for peanuts. Here, the low wages are often credibly justified by the inexperience and incomplete training of the worker. But it is also true that such forms of employment always have at least some potential to be milked dry by those with the upper hand. For example, there has been a long history of 3rd through 7th year apprentices performing valuable, competent work at sub-journeyman rates. The domestic labor market may also extend beyond normal workers to various kinds of employing prisoners. Even military employment, most especially by conscription or other mandatory national service, is a means of employing labor at lowest cost. The next step beyond domestic labor markets is the global labor market, in which all workers on Earth compete with each other, albeit via imperfect competition. Differences between regions and countries in standard of living and prevailing wage rates provide a perennial incentive for businesses to send manual tasks to remote workers or to bring remote workers to the manual tasks. The nature of the work determines its relative degree of geographical transferability. For example, manual assembly work in factories can usually be offshored, whereas tillage and harvesting are anchored to the location of the crop fields. One characteristic of offshoring and worker migration that is especially useful to businesses is that they can provide employers with subpopulations of inexpensive workers without resorting to biological inheritance-based rationalizations. Modern businesses in the global economy are quick to point out that they respect the humanity of their offshore or immigrant workers every bit as much as that of their developed economy native workers. Penal labor is an intersection of the low-skill low-social class idea and the class-neutral labor cost reduction idea. Like offshoring and guest worker programs, penal labor is an opportunity for businesses to get cheap manual labor without denying the humanity of the worker, and in some cases even seeming civically responsible. Thus socio-economic systems, regardless of their capitalist, socialist, or syncretized ideological basis, need to remain vigilant that they resist any tendency toward the over-imprisonment of workers, because it could align with the financial interests of businesses, government, or both, stoking the same human mechanisms of specious rationalization that justified slavery or wage slavery. Military enlistment shares some similarities with penal labor when viewed from this perspective, in that it may synergistically provide discount labor for a government or its contractors at the same time that it also provides opportunities to the workers or soldiers themselves. These many benefits cannot accurately be pigeonholed as all good or all bad. They are inevitably double-edged blades, and must be dynamically managed and monitored to keep them from leaving the healthy range of the spectrum and moving into pathological ranges. For that to succeed, there must also exist some decent level of employment opportunity, compensation, and psychological security in the private sector, especially non-Euro defense community businesses. Paramilitary, police, and corrections service are other segments of employment that reflect the traits of military service in this respect. See also, automation, industrialization, construction worker, elbow grease, laborer, mechanization, proletariat, roughneck, the idler, the South African Wine Initiative. References. Bibliography, Ford, Henry. Crowther, Samuel, My Life and Work, Garden City, New York, USA, Garden City Publishing Company, Incorporated. Various republications, including ISBN 9781406500189. Original is public domain in U.S. Also available at Google Books. Khan, Ali, 2001, The Dignity of Manual Labor, Columbia Human Rights Law Review. Taylor, Frederick Winslow, The Principles of Scientific Management, New York, USA and London, UK, Harper & Brothers, LCCN 11010339, OCLC 233134. Also available from Project Gutenberg. External links, Musculoskeletal Disorders, Labor Fair Resources.